I messed up tonight. I lost another fight. I still mess up, but I'll just start again. I keep falling down. I keep on hitting the ground. I always get enough. See what's next. Birds don't just fly. They fall down and get up. Nobody learns without getting it wrong. I won't give up, no, I won't give in till I reach the end and then I'll start again. No, I won't leave. I wanna try everything. I wanna try even though I could fail.
Good afternoon, evening, morning, or whatever time it is where you are. Welcome back to Zootopia Minute, the minute-by-minute podcast where we look at every single minute of the hit Disney movie Zootopia and we analyze it. We are back again once more. I am your host, Simul, and I'm joined here with my co-host, as always.
Chocolate Pony. And for a second there, I thought I was on Coast to Coast with George Norrie.
Oh my
with your
goodness
introduction.
gracious. I love that show, unironically.
I liked it better when Art Bell was
Yeah, Art
in
Bell
charge,
was better, but man, we could talk about that for days. But before we get too off track, yes, this here is minute 19. So this is from timestamp 1900 to 1959.
It's right when the little Finnick Fox points to the
Yes.
red Jumbo Pop, and we cut to Judy's reaction. And it ends when Judy kind of questions the elephant in charge of the establishment, saying, perhaps you don't know, but having trunks without gloves might be a blank.
It's something.
So-
It's blank. Yes, the elephant was very rude to Nick, and Judy felt the need to respond. So once again, a very interesting minute. We're progressing kind of slowly through this ice cream scene, but I don't really mind it because it's sort of a fun scene. We talked a bit in the last minute. It's a neat setting to see all the different ways they lay this out, especially with the scale. We talked about how everything is huge in here, and the bunny and the foxes are very small, and it's very strange having that juxtaposition.
And actually, in the concept art book, one of the editors of the Zootopia movie said that the Jumbo Pop scene in the ice cream shop was actually one of their favorite bits, and it was very hard to get the timing right. Comedy is much harder to cut than action. So,
Oh yeah, that's absolutely sure. Comedic timing is definitely more of an art than a science. It's actually, you know what, I say that, but that's just a phrase to be said. I bet someone could go through, analyze moments of like good examples of comedic timing and find some sort of ratio or something, some formula that dictates like what sort of timing is the funniest. That's got to exist, right? That must be a thing.
I'm sure
there
there
must be a
are.
quantitative measure for that.
I've seen a lot of documentaries with comedians. I've seen podcasts with like Joe Rogan, Dave Chappelle, and
Rogan's
all
awesome.
those like, and they kind of say there is something similar. So I'm sure there is. It's just that's not a area I know too much about.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know more about that. It's kind of interesting. But so one of the first things we hear out of the mouth of this big old elephant running the shop here is as he's trying to sort of dissuade Nick, get him to leave with his cute little Fennec Fox son, is, hey buddy, aren't there any fox ice cream places in your part of town? Which confirms something that I speculated about in the previous minute, saying, are there neighborhoods that just feature specific species or groups of species? And this seems to imply it. Aren't there fox ice cream places in your part of town? Implying foxes come from a specific part of town.
So you think that there is a part of town that's specifically for foxes in this world?
It could be. And it makes you think, is that just because species like to live near their own species, or is there some form of gentrification going on, forcing the different species into clumps like this? It's a very interesting social dynamic that could be feeding into that, perhaps.
It does have some reality in our world, like when I was living in San Francisco, and then when I actually went to visit New York City, like you could see that these large cities are divided into smaller ethnic regions, like you have the Vietnamese part, the Russian part, the Italian part. So I don't know, it might be just mirroring how our world, we tend to divide up in types like situations like that.
And a lot of those are generations deep too. Like those divisions have been around for a long time, and they go back to In the example of New York City, when immigrants would come from those countries, and, one of the disadvantages to being an immigrant is maybe you don't know the language, you don't speak English, you'll want to be in a community where people speak the same language you do. In this universe, I don't know if that really works because everyone seems to speak the same language. So maybe there's something else going on.
Yeah, they all mysteriously speak English.
English, or what we hear is English. Maybe it's just a collection of noises, who knows? But that's all any language is. It's a collection of noises, small mouth movements. But what's interesting is that Judy, upon hearing that remark by the elephant, aren't there any Fox ice cream places in your part of town? Her ears immediately shoot up, perk up, and she turns around with this sort of indignant look on her face as if she's offended that she could hear this. And my immediate thought was, Judy, weren't you just about to judge this fox for being a fox? Like,
yes,
why are you suddenly so indignant about it?
That was my reaction as well, and it's sometimes my reaction to my more kind of bleeding heart friends who they are completely fine with acting a little bit more prejudiced, but then when they hear someone else act a little prejudiced, they all of a sudden become a bit more gung-ho, saying, that's not correct. You shouldn't be acting that way. And it's just like, wait, weren't you just doing that a second ago? So
it's policing. Well, she's a police officer. She has to police other people.
Yeah, but yeah, the only reason she's in that ice cream shop to begin with was because she had some prejudicial stereotype about that fox. So
get off your high horse, Judy.
Yeah,
rabbits don't ride horses.
You better not. That's like slavery in this world.
Oh, man. It's controversial.
Right.
A rabbit? How many rabbits could fit on a horse, though? Probably a lot.
Actually, yeah, I'm trying to think because we saw zebras in an earlier. I think we did see horses. Okay, but we don't see them as often.
You could probably fit so many. You could probably build a multi-compartment sort of house structure on top of it, and so you have it'd be like an AT-AT. They build this big thing around the outside of the horse.
I'm sure that'd be very demeaning for a horse, and especially since we come from a fandom that's all equine. That would be pretty offensive.
Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it'd be cool to be the vehicle horse. Be like, yeah.
Okay, that's getting to more for affinity fetishes. We're not going to get into that right now. All right, let's move to
someone draw
cute.
That if someone wants to draw like a rabbit structure on top of a horse, like some sort of weird mechanical.
Are you telling me this is what you want the title card to be for this week?
Yes. That's perfect. See, I saved so much work for you.
All right. Well, let's go back to one of the cuter parts of the minute is when Nick was trying to say, but my son here, he thinks he's an elephant, and the Finnick fox does a little cute toot toot.
Yeah, and we see that that sort of loose-fitting garment that he was wearing was actually a little fox costume. So this is the first example of a furry in this movie.
A little elephant costume, but yeah. He's wearing an elephant fursuit.
Yeah, that's and this
we heard
this was
you
another
like your furries, so we made your furries furries.
It's extra furry. Although I guess elephants, they're like pachyderms, right? They're hairy. They're not super furry. Here's what I wanted to know. Is that not somewhat offensive? Like, would that be something considered offensive? Like, oh, you want to be one of my species, one of my race, essentially?
Because there's a Tumblr side to the argument and there's a 4chan side to the argument.
Yeah, well, as far as I can tell, there's like division amongst people on whether that's okay. Because there are people that claim to be transracial too, and I think that's
that's the one thing that really. Because I understand the entire thing about cultural appropriation, like especially with the Native Americans, that was a big thing that they don't want their head garments, which to them are the equivalent of like Medal of Honors and Purple Hearts,
right? You're
randomly worn by
it.
people.
Mm-hmm.
But then, because especially, I guess for international viewers within the Western world, specifically the United States, there's a thing called gender dysphoria where you don't identify with your biological gender or birth gender, and some people, and currently in this day and age, we are open to more non-binary gender expression. So if you are biologically male, the government says you're male, but if you feel female, that is your right to identify as a female. But then around the exact same time, you had that controversy where one of the presidents of the NAACP was revealed to actually be a white woman.
Rachel Dolezal. She was in Spokane, Washington, in my state.
Yeah, she's near you. Which is kind of funny because she is. I'm going to get into deep trouble for
no.
Just expressing the sides, but like her arguments about why she identifies with the African American community seem to be using the exact same arguments for why someone who's biologically male might identify as female, but the public in America especially has seemed to side it with one side for being okay and the other side as cultural appropriation. And so it becomes tricky because on one end you have a white woman who grew up without the burden and the years of racial profiling and Jim Crow laws and all the stuff that people could use to say how down the African American community. So the one thing that they kind of have going now are things like affirmative action and all that stuff, which she's taking advantage of by being a person in a position of privilege and trying to represent herself as someone who's disenfranchised. So it gets a bit crazy, and we don't have people here to defend all the sides, but that's kind of the rough arguments on both sides. So it's tricky. So we don't know.
It is an interesting question. Why is one okay and not the other? And also maybe part of it is, are you really, if you're transracial, are you really wanting to be that race, as in physically you want to have that skin tone and these physiological characteristics, or are you more interested in the culture associated with that race? And perhaps the same thing can be said in transgenderism as well. Is it about morphology, or is it about gender roles, or it's a very muddy issue. It's very complex, and we can't claim to be able to dissect it perfectly in such a limited
Where do we draw the
amount of time.
line? So, like, for example, me being from an East Asian culture, things like martial arts and kung fu are actually not like, it's like there's something that are actually really important culturally and religiously as a Taoist to me. And, you know, I see a bunch of kung fu films, like, of white people and black people doing all these kung fu moves, like, completely out of context, but you know what, I'm okay with it. But I could understand where some religious Taoists who actually practice this might be really offended. Like, if you actually look at that argument, like why people were angry about white women pretending to be black, the same argument could be made with a show like Boondocks, which is a good show, but they basically shoehorned so much Asian kung fu out of context that could be argued as cultural appropriation as well. But people look up at, people think that show is like impressive and all that stuff, but someone else appropriating another culture is
it's making
cultural appropriation. So it's a tricky argument, because that's actually the one thing that kind of made me angry about just this election. A lot of the social justice and the people on the right and left arguing is they are completely fine with being hypocrites. If something goes their way and represents their side, they see no problem with it. But if another side or another group does it and it doesn't follow their ideology, they point it out as a fault.
Right. It's all about superficial sort of ends rather than means, or rather than principle.
Yeah. So it becomes tricky. But I don't know. In this world, do you think the elephants would be offended? Actually, in the concept art book, I actually want to point this out. There's one animatic that we actually don't see in the movie, but it's when the little finnick fox does the toot toot with the little elephant suit. So someone drew a picture of the finnick fox doing the tooting.
Which Judy thought was so cute. She's like, "Aw."
But he's doing it towards a mother and looks like a boy elephant, like a little kid elephant. He's wearing like one of those little spinner caps. And the mother elephant's kind of hugging her son like, oh, that's a weirdo. Watch out for the weirdo.
Stay away from him, Billy.
So the mother and son elephant eating ice cream, watching this finnick fox doing an impression of an elephant, they seem a bit more worried than offended.
Worried, like scared.
Yeah, like I'm surprised we didn't get that shot in the movie, because that would have been a bit funny. But that would have been a comedic scene and would kill the doll moment that Judy had afterwards. So
I always wonder, this is somewhat not related perhaps, but it's interesting how some animals seem to use certain characteristics to pick up on what sort of other animal they're looking at. I have house cats, and I was like looking at one of my house cats, and it was looking at me, and then I had like this set of cat ears, like a little pair of cat ears you could wear, and I put that on, and then the cat kind of freaked out and like didn't want to come near me. And it's like, was it really just the ears? Is it just the ears enough to convince my cat that I am also a cat? Like, how similar does something need to be to the real thing to qualify as it to these different animals? You know, it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure there's studies done on it, but
Well, it's also just fascinating to me that certain animals can even just recognize where another animal's eyes are, for instance, and know that, oh, those are its eyes. That's where it sees from. Like, and the animal has an understanding of that function of the eyes. There's certain types of cobras, like venom-spitting cobras, that will always aim for the eyes on other animals. And if you have like a picture of eyes, you can hold it somewhere and they'll aim for that. It's crazy. It's cool.
We as humans actually do that as well. We often say, the eyes are the window to the soul, which is why when the animals that we actually think are cute and cuddly are ones that have more expressive or human-looking eyes, like mammals, and the animals that we actually think as creepy or scary or distant are animals with very, very cold black or distant eyes, like
we
sharks
talked about this a few minutes
lizards.
ago, I think.
Yeah, so it is a bit weird, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Like, certain things animals can recognize and other things they can't. Like, most animals, cats certainly can't. I don't know if dogs can. I feel like dogs probably can't either. Tell what you're doing when you're pointing. If you're pointing with your finger, they're going to look at your finger. They're not going to look at what you're pointing at. They're not going to, like, look behind them. Like, oh, there's something behind you. They don't understand that that's what that action means. So it's interesting where the boundary lies between things we recognize as having this universal meaning and what an animal might perceive that as being too. Now, we're obviously talking about real animals, which is a little bit off topic, but still hopefully interesting for people to hear about. Going right back into the minute.
Judy does express, I noticed that when she was talking to the elephant, she kind of raised her voice when she said, "Do your customers understand that they're getting snot with their cookies and cream?"
Snot and mucus with their cookies and
cream. Yeah, she raises her voice specifically when she started saying that. And in the next scene, we actually do see an elephant get snot with the cookies and cream when the other elephant kind of sneezes it across to the elephant across the way from.
I think it was like a romantic scene between two elephants where they had their trunks sort of... It's like how you would drink champagne with your arms linked with someone. Yeah. But they were doing that with ice cream with their trunks. I thought that
I don't
was
want to
kind of
misgender them by saying one of them is male or female, but one elephant, when he or she hears that comment, squirts the ice cream across the way. So the other elephant actually got a lot of snot on their face, probably. So that was not nice.
This, of course, following the elephant running the shop's final refusal to service Nick and his son, saying, look at the sign, buddy. We reserve the right to not service anyone, which is a sign that a lot of real businesses indeed have. Yeah, then he implied that foxes couldn't read either. That's super racist.
That is racist.
Wow.
I know. Such elephants, man. I bet you the donkeys would be more progressive.
Do you think that was a subtle message the makers of the movie were trying to slip in there? Do we ever see a donkey in this movie? I'm not sure.
No, because donkeys are more domesticated animals, so I don't think
You're
we've
right,
seen
so
much
they wouldn't
domesticated.
exist.
But actually, I actually, speaking of that, I did see I think it was on Tumblr the other day, where someone was asking, wait, if there's no cows in Zootopia, where did they get the milk? And then someone retweeted, replied back, don't go asking questions you don't want to know the answer to. And the person who tweeted that actually worked on the animation studio that for Zootopia. So.
Oh my gosh. That is kind of a weird question.
Yeah, it's like, okay, which animal in this world do they milk for their dairy products? So.
Oh gosh. They just have volunteers. Like, what if that's your job? Humans? You live as an utopia and that's your job? You just provide milk for dairy products? Ugh.
It's funny because right before we watched this minute, I was watching an episode of BoJack Horseman, and they were in the diner, and when the cat asked for a glass of milk, the cow waitress just lifted up her armpit and just squirted some milk into a glass and gave it to her.
It's very fresh.
Yeah. So,
oh, man.
I don't know. I guess we'll see where the milk comes from. Maybe they keep humans underground and milk humans for their man milk.
Like a giant matrix of humans. It's like the Matrix. They're just all chained up, connected, and they've got machines going. Okay, this is getting a bit deep, perhaps. But yeah, Judy's tactic now to sort of get back at this elephant guy is saying, you're a jerk. I notice that you're using an ungloved trunk to pick up this ice cream, and that's some sort of thing, some violation, presumably. We don't know. It gets cut off into the next minute. But ungloved trunk. What does a trunk glove look like? That sounds like just a giant condom. Like, that's what I picture. Like, what else would that be? What is a trunk glove?
What size condom do they have to get? Like a Magnum XXXXXL?
Like, just a gigantic latex single tube. That's what a condom is.
Okay, this is supposed to be a nice, fun kids escapist film for me. I don't want to think about any of the fur affinity stuff. Please get that out of my mind. No, but also, it's also tricky because the trunk is also its breathing apparatus.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so
that's
it
what the
basically
reservoir
clogs up
tip
its
is for.
breathing. I mean, it would have to breathe through its mouth at that point, but then that would mean getting a lot of spittle and hot air onto the ice cream it's scooping up. So that would be kind of counterproductive.
And that's why he wasn't wearing the glove. That's his excuse.
Yeah. Huh. It's actually, yeah, it's kind of interesting now. But yeah, it couldn't breathe with the glove. And if it did have a glove, you'll basically be seeing a giant condom with a kid's film.
Yeah, that's what the reservoir tip is for. It's for breathing.
Oh my gosh. All right. I don't want to get too much into that.
Well, in other news, an interesting announcement that perhaps some of our friends in the Brony community may have been privy to or seen come out recently is that BroNYCon has announced that beginning this year in 2017, the convention will start to branch out into non-pony territory and start supporting more non-pony content, general Western animation stuff, representing other fandoms, basically. And there's been sort of mixed opinions on it, mixed feedback from that. So I wanted to know what you thought of it, because I know you made a specific prediction about this kind of thing.
On a personal though, I want to say I think it's kind of ironic that the platform. So I ran for Contour about 3 years ago for BroNYCon just to get some ideas across. I didn't expect to win, but when I presented the platform, I guess the current BroNYCon staff, who I guess are still around, were kind of criticizing it. And now basically within the next 3 years, almost every single one of my points in the my platform has come true. So things about like security, beefing up security, reorganizing the vendor hall, how panels should be done, even to the organization, how the concert should not have more than one, consecutive term. And now I basically said one of the main points was we had to look for the future of how these cons are going to evolve. BroNYCon is the one of all the other pony conventions could naturally transition to Western animation cons because they don't have Brony built into the name. But the one issue BroNYCon would have, because its name is BroNYCon, it is going to be primarily a pony convention. So it can't rebrand its name, so it would have to rebrand its marketing. And I was predicting that the future of cons would be Western animation cons, because that's one subsection. When you go to every single comic, furry, and anime con, you always see a large subsection of Western animation, specifically the Animation Renaissance and the Animation Revival, which is made up of things like Last Avatar, Steven Universe, Gravity Falls, and stuff. And I said that would naturally evolve from a Brony convention, because a Western animation con by itself will not have the backing or substance to stand on its own. And in fact, I predicted that we will see Western animation cons create themselves, but they won't last and have the same effect. And within that time, DrawCon and DerpyCon,
yeah, I was just gonna say,
and DerpyCon were two Western animation cons that came up, but they weren't as successful as they wanted to be. So I said the only natural way for this to happen is if the BroNYCons reshifted themselves to be Western animation cons. And I'm thinking this is now a correct time, because now that Hasbro's doing the My Little Pony movie, what is predicted is after the 7th season and the movie, they're going to shift into a new generation or shift into a new direction.
Which will mean when that happens. Jeez.
Yeah, the current Friendship is Magic, the Lauren Faust phase of My Little Pony will be over. It will shift into a completely new direction, and at that point ponycons have to have a natural evolution in one direction, or they will kind of diminish themselves. But my main prediction actually is funny. Yeah, it's kind of funny because so about 5 years ago, in fact, actually before I even made that platform, so I've been working on a book on fan conventions for a while, and one of the predictions I made 5 years ago was by 2017, 2018, a lot of the ponycons, first of all, we'll stop seeing small local ponycons start bursting out, and they will gradually diminish until there is basically one solid contender on each coast. So BroNYCon's obviously the main contender for the East Coast, and I was saying either Everfree or BabsCon or both of them together will be the last remaining on the West Coast, and that will kind of be enough to sustain the remaining hardcore bronies. And all the other pony cons, what they will have to do after that is basically transition into Western animation, which is what actually TrotCon did first. So people are making a big fuss about BroNYCon because it is the biggest in the fandom. But TrotCon, which is another older pony convention, basically also made that same announcement last year that they're now wanting to transition into Western animation. So it's kind of funny because something that I was mostly a concept, a prediction in my head and on paper for like 5 years ago is now coming true. So I just think that's a bit amusing.
Yeah, I did want to get your perspective on that because I know that is something you said would happen, and you know I think that's the natural way for it to go, and it's what needs to happen. I've certainly heard people that are somewhat upset by this. I don't think there's any cause for alarm because, you know, it's undoubtedly true that the Brony fandom is definitely past its peak. That's not to say it's dying. There's certainly a difference there. But we're not at the same place we were maybe in like 2013, 2014, which is when I would kind of pinpoint the very peak of the fandom. And this isn't a new idea either. This is something that these pony conventions have been looking at for a very long time because I think they saw the same thing you saw, where this is how we achieve longevity. This is how we can survive longer if we want to continue as a convention when the Brony community has dwindled a little bit more. And again, not that it's dying, because I think the people that say the Brony fandom is dying, you should go ask the people that just joined what they think. Because I think a lot of it, I've had that perspective too. I've said, you know what, it seems like the fandom's not as big as it used to be. And that might be partially true, but I think I'm also just less involved in the fandom than I used to be. And it's my own perspective. But then I go talk to people at these conventions, right? Because I work for Everfree and for BroNYCon. I'm one of the BroNYCon mascots. I talk to people, and there's people that are still so enthusiastic about it. And I remember being at that stage, you know, and it's very encouraging. It's really refreshing to see. So I'm not worried about the Brony fandom going away. It's always going to exist in some form. I think that this was a smart move for BroNYCon in terms of longevity. It's how they're going to be able to stick around. They can keep that BroNYCon name, you know, because, you know, it's a throwback. Stick to your roots, that kind of thing. And I certainly expect that any con that wants to stay around is going to make a similar transition. I know for a fact that's not a new idea. Cons have discussed this before. It's always been on the table, not unprecedented whatsoever. So it just remains to be seen what'll happen. But I'm not worried about it at all. And I'd encourage anyone that is worried to just sort of take a step back, look at the bigger picture, and appreciate it for what it is and what's happening and all the cool things that we've achieved already as a fandom, you know?
Oh yeah. I think that's also the one thing, like you were saying, some people are kind of saying, oh, the pony fandom is dying, and that's the example. And the other saying, no, our fandom is too big. Why do you want to transition to that? I think kind of both sides overlook the issue a bit because, like you were saying, obviously it's not dying. It's always going to continuously have a stream of people, kind of like the Star Trek fandom and Doctor Who fandom, which has been around for 50 years, and Star Trek cons are still on a continuous high. But people also who are on the other side misinterpret how big the fandom was. Like we saw, actually the one thing that I did not predict was BroNYCon reaching 10,000 in attendance. And I've always written that size off as a fluke. Because based on my calculations, no con specifically for a single generation of a fandom should be that size. And there's actually a lot of contributing factors to why it was so big specifically that year, including some of the other cons disappearing. So BroNYCon filled the void. There was a cruise ship that came into town. There's a lot of little factors.
And the numbers did drop down again to 7,000 the following year. But I mean, you say it's a fluke, and maybe there's some truth to that. But I would also counter and say the whole Brony fandom itself is a fluke. It's one giant fluke. It shouldn't have happened, but it did.
No, you know, it's funny. People keep on telling me that, but I keep on explaining. Actually, it's not a fluke. It's actually very, very predictable. If you look at human psychology, and if you look at the specific time period where Bronies came about. Because when I was at Pacific PonyCon, one of the things that I guess parents and random visitors to PonyCon were questioning were how did Bronies happen? And it's funny because I saw a lot of Brony musicians and YouTubers just kind of stumbled through the question, and they just turned to me and say, well, you know how to explain it very simply. And I basically say, a millennial culture who grew up on the animation renaissance all of a sudden inherits a recession, housing crisis and student loans, go into college, realize the jobs that they wanted are not going to be feasible, realizing they're going to have a lot of student loans to inherit, realizing they're not exactly where they are in life. All of a sudden, animation revival happens. They see a show from a creator who was working during the animation renaissance. This brings back nostalgia and makes them happy, give them a new start in life. And people basically said, oh, wow, that's a very simple answer. And it kind of makes sense if you think about in that perspective. So I don't think the pony thing is a fluke. But yeah,
I am trying to be all romantic, make a profound statement. You got to go all technical.
It did kind of reach its point. It did what it was supposed to do. The idea of males, straight males, liking a show that was meant for girls about rainbows and ponies and all that stuff basically changed how we kind of looked at society. In fact, you could say when I do my transformative art panel, it's very, very hard for me to find one example of a transformative piece of Brony music, fan fiction, or art that I could argue is transformative. The only thing I could say was transformative was the culture in general, in the sense that we kind of changed how, I guess, people saw the gender stereotypes and gender roles and how we could see strong female characters. In fact, after My Little Pony fandom, and specifically after the rise of the Bronies, we saw a bunch of shows start shifting more to strong female characters. And you could say that that was a direct reaction to what Lauren Faust started. So it's a very, very interesting thing. It's not going to go away. We have the Star Trek cons and the Star Trek fandom as an example of a con that will still survive long after the height of the fandom. There's still people coming in. So, but don't worry about it. It's if you like going to the cons, still continue to go to the cons.
Yeah, just go to the cons.
Nothing's going to change. Yeah,
it's as simple as that.
It's also funny because another thing I predicted also kind of, I'm not saying came true, but other persons saw similar ways. Specifically, I just finished writing a book about military schools in America. And apparently another book is going to beat me by about 1 month. This book is going to be released 1 month before mine. Yikes. But I was able to look at a preview of this book, and independently, this author and myself came up with the exact same conclusions about military schools in America. Independently, which is just fascinating. I'm just thinking,
lends credence to your idea, though. Independent verification there.
So this is the month that all the weird predictions I've been making in my books are coming true.
Ooh, fun.
There we go.
February. Yeah, it's certainly an interesting situation, and I'll be happy to see what happens. Because this will always be an interesting time to think back on in my life when this fandom was central to everything, and it's will always hold a fond place in my heart, no matter where it goes. And we certainly hope that Zootopia Minute holds a fond place in all of your hearts. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy us, please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, all that good stuff. And please tell your friends about the show as well. We love to get the word out there. Any help you can give us with that, we really appreciate it. Helps spread the news, helps us find new audiences. So, if you've got a friend that likes Zootopia or just cartoons in general, or ponies even, whatever, just let them know what we're about, and we certainly appreciate that. So thank you so much for listening.
If you like us, follow us on Zootopia Minute at Twitter, and you can also email us at zootopiaminute@gmail.com. So feel free to follow us there.
All right, thanks so much, everybody. Have an excellent week.
Bye. Love and tolerate.